Good morning to all of you. I'm very happy to welcome you to our second day of our conference. I think that, yeah.
Is it off?
I think no.
No, that's not like.
Yeah, no idea. Now it's time? Yeah. Good morning to all of you again. I'm very happy to welcome you in our second day of the conference. Now it's okay. My name is Lucilla Vidi. I'm assistant professor at the University of Potsdam. And I would like, first of all, to thank Marta Faustino and Hélder Telo for organizing this great conference and also for putting together our research group, Mapping Philosophy as a Way of Life. Let's start in medias res. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker today, António de Castro Caeiro. He's a professor at Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Lisbon, and belongs to the investigation unit NOVA. He's an essayist and translator. He obtained his PhD in ancient philosophy with a thesis with the title The Arete as Extreme Possibility of the Human, Phenomenology of Praxis in Plato and Aristotle. He's working on ancient and contemporary philosophy. He was visiting scholar in Sao Paulo, in Florida, and in Oxford. He translated, among numerous works, I would like only to mention once, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And he also published numerous essays, among others, St. Paul, Apocalypse and Conversion, published in 2014, and For the One Days, Not Every Day, published in 2015, and recently in the UK, Reflections on Everyday Life, 2019. The title of her talk is today, Philosophy on Doing One's Way of Being. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for your very nice presentation. The first take would be on Plato's Phaedo, where Socrates says that doing philosophy is doing music.
Yeah, I don't know.
No?
No?
Yeah. I will skip that part, and I will focus on a development of that part in an essay on an interpretation of von Uexküll's from Merleau-Ponty. So the first, and most of it, is an analysis of von Uexküll's take on melody, and then an interpretation of Merleau-Ponty take on Uexküll take on melody. So, medias in res. Le déploiement d'un nouvelle, c'est une mélodie qui se chante elle-même. Says Merleau-Ponty in his score La Nature du Collège de France, 1956-1960. So the first chapter, Transformation of Reality, signs into notes of a melody we can sing. Maurice Merleau-Ponty, in his courses on philosophy of nature, interprets Jacob von Uexküll's concept of Umwelt as a melody. We wanted to understand what von Uexküll says. How is it possible to reduce non-acoustic contents, optical colors, shapes and figures, haptic, tactile, textures, flavors, tastes and fragrances to sounds or musical notes that make a melody, if we make this literal equation? Does the connection between melody and nature make natural beings, musical notes? Are the parts of each being anatomical notes of the melody that each being is as such? Is the relationship the being that we are or any animal subject is and the beings that appear to it advance? The thesis we study here follows the reduction, or rather the restoration, of a content to a musical sign. Thus, each point of each being isolated and in a constellation with other beings is reduced to a node sign in a scale with a duration, pitch, and volume. So melody, rhythm, and harmony are higher structures that express and give to understand the meaning of nature's being. Also, every human being, every living being, animal and plant, has a subjective biological interiority. The inner world of every living subject and the objects in the outer world are comprised in an atmosphere, a musical umwelt. Human lives in a musical element or atmosphere. The explanation of the world offered by physics is different from the biological one in von Uexküll's statement. Physics studies the causal relationship between two beings. Biology interprets the relationship between two beings from a plane that configures it. The relation between the percussion of the hammer on a piano string and the sound obtained is understood as a mechanical cause. However, the relation between the moment of that sound and the preceding moment, silence or other sounds, as well as with the following moment, other sounds or silence, so that a melody is heard, is already understood in conformity with a planmäßigkeit. Von Uexküll tries to reduce the whole presentation and moments of that presentation to musical notes, stimuli, and impressions. Physics studies objects in causal relation. Biology, in this sense, studies the notes with which an object presents itself diachronically to the same subject and synchronically to various subjects, animal and human. The understanding of the relationship between two objects from the physical perspective is causal and mechanical. Biology, in this sense of von Uexküll, reduces an object to the signals it presents. As we shall see, the signals are interpreted as musical notes, making up melody. So in handouts, I didn't order it, but it's theoretical biology, so TB84. When the hammer strikes the string of a piano and the note sounds, that is a purely causal series, eine reine Kausalreihe. If this note belongs to a melody, it is interpolated in a sound series, which also exhibits arrangement, but not of a causal kind. Wenn dieser Ton aber einer Melodie angehört, so ist in einer Tonreihe hineingestellt, die gleichfalls eine Ordnung darstellt, die aber nicht kausaler Natur ist. Number two, the cognitive embedded in an interventional design. From here, this difference can be applied to the whole field of presentation. The causal explanation of physics does not understand the projection at play according to a plan. When the carpenter cuts and shapes wood into rails and rungs, and when the drill bores through the rails, and the hammer drives the rungs into the holes, these are all in causal succession. But the structure emerging from this process, the ladder, cannot be understood by causality, causal nicht zu begreifen. It can be understood only from a knowledge, Kenntnis, of the plan arrangement, planvolle Anordnung, of the rungs in relation to the rails, and of all the parts to the whole. Das hierbei entstandene Gebilde, die Leiter, ist aber kausal gar nicht zu begreifen, sondern nur durch Kenntnis der planvollen Anordnung der Sprossen zu den Stangen und aller Teile zum Ganzen. We can now formulate the thesis that reduces an object to a musical note, a melody, strange as it may seem. So quote from TB84. We shall call objects, Gegenstände, those beings, the construction of which is not to be explained by mere causality. since in them the parts stand in the same relation to the whole as the individual sounds to the melody. Number 3, the elements in a musical atmosphere. Human beings exist in a world with other beings, humans, other humans, animals, plants, organisms, and non-organic things throughout time. The subjective and non-objective elements exist inside, as Van says, an invisible soap bubble, unsichtbare Seifenblase, and more broadly, in an environmental tunnel, Umwelttunnel. The way of understanding, interpreting, and acting unique to each living being happens inside this temporal tunnel, structuring whatever appears from the inside out. According to Jacob van Uxküll, theoretical biology consists of a complex identification of elementary parts and functions that each animal carries, receptor organs and action organs. Each animal subject carries an apparatus for channeling other beings. The world is scanned and is ready for an active intervention because each being, animal, vegetable, organic, and non-organic, gets a biological meaning projected by each subject living in a bubble along the time channeling environment. Each object would be in itself an incognita, for what each subject, animal, vegetable, human perceives depends upon the bubble in which it exists in time. Channeling contents and possibility for action, rest and digest, fight or flight. Each object and each subject, prey for instance, as an object, are reduced to signs. Each sign is double-sided. It is a sense perception accessed through receptive organs. On the other hand, each object has vital points, erogenous spots, for instance, which are channeled by effector organs. Therefore, an object can have multifaceted sense contents only to be perceived by some animal at some point in a given situation. Those can persist undetected by other animals or the same animal at different times. An object can be signaled as food for a fly and not for a human being. A fly effects its way to get the food. The human being avoids it or doesn't take notice. Van Uxküll's second-order analysis elaborates upon this reciprocal interchanging between animal points of view with intervention capability and objects interpreted as bearers or carriers of sense contents and intervention handles. All beings exist inside a world environment having the protostructure of a melody. The main aim of Van Uxküll's theoretical biology is to reduce any acoustic and non-acoustic signs to a musical note of a melodic organization. While in Western music we have 7 natural notes, A, D, C, D, E, F, and G, not for a Portuguese, of course, each having a duration, a pitch from very high to very low, a volume. We also have harmony and rhythm in a melody. The correlation between musical signs and sounds is the same that exists between the sounds of an idiom and its graphic appearance. The correlation between music as well as between speech, conversation, thinking, and time is evident. So evident that we don't think about it often. What we call proprioception enables us to find ourselves in a particular way at each moment of the day as we connect to and import the outside world through a musical model. Each object sends a double sign received by sense organs and action organs in the animal subject. But we cannot say that this is a subjective approach to the way we live in the environmental world. On the other hand, a signal, sense, and point of engaging would be a blind spot that wouldn't even exist for any subject. Moreover, a real being can be experienced as a virtual being, as when the situation we find ourselves in changes into a dreamlike situation. I quote Paul Valéry tel quel. Si les regards pouvaient enfanter ou tuer, les rues seraient remplies de femmes enceintes et jonchées de cadavres. The way we look at beings tends to project a possible behavior and action. It is not only a cognitive approach, or we can say a cognitive approach is embedded in a world that calls for action. Inaction has also its consequences, as we know all. The reduction of the signs sent by objects is a simultaneously cognitive and behavioral call for action. A further question should be, how are we to handle high-level sensations or impressions that depend upon feelings more than emotions? What we become to feel for somebody, either love or hate, forgiveness and grudge or resentment, nothing at all, or the world, sketches at the same time possible actions. When we do something about it, what is the meaning of doing at stake here? We can talk to somebody and declare our love, saying how sorry we are for the way we've behaved, or tell them how afflicted we are by the way somebody makes us feel so bad. Either we let go or we engage. Either we forget or try to forget bad things that happen, or we try to change them, or the way we deal with them. In either case, when we come into somebody's life or move away of somebody's influence, the atmosphere is musical, the melody is sweet and beautiful, or a chaotic cacophony of noise. Number 4, brief elementary analysis of a world structured by a musical environment. The most diverse kinesthetic fields are accompanied by proprioception that conjugates all the elements of signs of objects musically. Our atmosphere is musical. Learning to read identifies a projective structure in which perception is not limited to the original impression, but includes in itself retention of the past just now and pretension of the future in a moment to come. To read, we don't just focus momentarily on a letter isolated from the previous and the following, but we read in blocks. We read more than a word. Some people read more than a line. Scanning or skipping, so on and so on. But reading a book anticipates looking from the left, right, top to bottom, turning up the page, shrinking of the page volume as the reading is done, at least in Occident. To learn to read, we look at the letters, their connection to other letters, words, and their arrangement in lines, pages. The gaze sweeps the line, but does not fixate on each letter in isolation. Each letter is understood in its relation to the previous one. Even without spelling, we immediately read the sounds of words, of sentences, maybe even of speech. I quote Theoretical Biology 25 to 26. When reading, when the eye must follow the lines of letters and numbers, only looking comes into play. By repeating the same sequence of directional signs repeatedly, this sequence of signs becomes fixed in our memory like a melody. It enables us to recognize the familiar letter at any time and produce it in our imagination. Finally, we also establish the melody of the directional signs by copying the letter so that the impulse sequence for the arm muscles follows in the manner prescribed by it. Then we can write. We have been able to convince ourselves that the same sequence of impulses in the mirror image arms gives rise to a reversal of the lines. Parallel analysis is given by Wittgenstein, the philosophical philosopher. In looking at letters, in seeing and reading them, there are several dimensions that correspond to temporally distant phenomena across a sequence of moments. The gaze is fixed on the letter. There is a previous learning of the letters of the alphabet. The 23 letters of the alphabet that the Portuguese child learns. The learning is optical and acoustic. It can also be tactile, braille. The reading eye does not detect only visual content, such as the difference between a lowercase a and the uppercase a. The sound is different for consonants and for vowels and semi-vowels. Each letter of the alphabet is given a time that isolates it from the previous and the next. When reading, we identify the letter in a different way. We don't even identify only diphthongs, admitting between consonants or between consonants, vowels, semi-vowels, and diphthongs. We spell to be able to pick up the sound of monosyllabic and polysyllabic words. It is more than the work of recognizing the identical and the different, the similar and the dissimilar. By reading, we are catapulted into a world of meaning. The perception of reading is radically different from the sensitive perception of the visual or acoustic aspect of a word. When we read, we enter in a world of meaning. The same is true when learning foreign language. We identify the visual aspect of letters in alphabets as different from Latin as Greek, Arabic, or Chinese. As then pay attention to sound and pronunciation, attend classes, take foreign language courses, read texts, use dictionaries or tutorials, subtitle movies in that language, etc. The goal is always to be transported directly to the meaning. This is not the case if the font is illegible because it is small or distorts the usual appearance of letters, if there are typos, or if the text is in a language that we do not know. We can, however, identify Basque or Finnish, difference between Korean, Japanese, and Chinese just by watching the Netflix series spoken in those languages. I am, however, unable to understand what is being said, much less to speak it, even less to write it. Number 5, a non-stigmatic point of view, so a non-Cartesian point of view, and the mind always speaking in a never-ending conversation. So a part of this thing. We can extend the scope further. Not all the sentences that fill the content of our lives are spoken aloud, God forbid. We have not told some people what we would have liked to, and yet we imagine those conversations and the situations in which we would tell someone what we think of them, good or bad. We can describe our past as if it were a detailed report or log of everything that happened, resorting to real and imaginary descriptions, objective and subjective, to dialogues, what we think but don't say. Learning to read, and then actually reading is possible because we have always heard and tried to speak. In our lives, the experience of saying how it is with us, of expressing ourselves and hearing others speak in situation in which they speak, intonation, pitch, sound volume, way of speaking, words used, allows us to identify the situation even when we don't understand any words in that language. We know very well if we are being threatened, assaulted, what the mood is of someone who is questioning us without knowing that we don't speak the language in which we are being questioned, or 1 minute of silence of our mom when we behave badly. So what? This is wrong. Sorry. It begins the same process that happens when we learn letters. It's repeated over and over again. When we look at objects, der gleiche Vorgang wie beim Erlernen der Buchstaben wiederholt sich immer und immer wieder beim Betrachten von Gegenständen. We see, hear, touch, smell, and taste the same objects over and over again until a melody is constituted, bis sich eine Melodie festgesetzt hat, with the signs of the objects directing us, guiding us. It is the qualitative and not strictly acoustic musical constitution of the melody, duration, intensity, and volume that allows the surfing of the wave of time. The original sequence involves coexistences of sequences that give meaning to all moments. Each moment is analyzed in its content and in the sequence by which the contents of an object are distributed. There is a resemblance between each impulse, in fact, in the sequences of impulses, although we do not have an immediate knowledge, unmittelbare Erkenntnis, of each impulse at the moment it happens. there is a recognition through the melodies that constitute the signals of orientation or direction, however lacunar they may be. Each moment is the temporal element by which, however minute, the contents spread out and distend. A moment is always already distended. We have a tacit understanding of what happens with time and the lack of it in the short, medium, and long term. An object is interpreted from the signals, Zeichen, and impulses it emits and instills, or can emit and instill. Similarly, an object has the possibility to identify these signals cognitively without changing his behavior. But he can also use those same signals not as Merkzeichen or Merkmalzeichen, but as Werkzeichen or Werkmalzeichen. So letters, syllables, words, sentences, pages, text do not just appear as a graphic blur or a sound. When reading, we want to understand. Understanding does not result from a connection between a sensation and the sensory visual or acoustic content. Understanding a text puts us in a certain mood, technical, theoretical, practical, pragmatical, or even poetic. So if you read the second Philippics of Cicero, or if Marcus Antonius read it, we know that Cicero will be killed. So writing the second Philippic is not writing only a text, doesn't give a depth of culture. Only we give depth of a culture. Reading comprehension takes place in the behavioral relationship, if you will. The effect that the text produces is not only optical, as if we were in a place where we would be unable to perceive the words with which street names are enunciated. For example, knowing the name of the street serves to get us back to the hotel, to go where we want to go. There is an instrumentalization of reading for survival in wanting to understand the language in which a conversation is held between kidnappers or robbers or traders. Each and every object has more than a sight, touch, smell, taste, and hearing confirmation. It has a meaning. Each and every object means something, has something to say, even when it's stuck away in a corner of the house. It has various values of significance, even when it is no longer used. The appearance of a city on first impression, even in the first months, is completely of the moment when we last see it. After having lived there, the beach of my childhood can be morphologically the same, and yet it is now unrecoverable in adulthood. But it causes an effect, and my access to that place, seeks to resurrect people and experiences that are unrecoverable, or they are long dead. Number 6, the relationship between the elementary constitution of subjectivity and objectivity. We see how the animal subject with its receptors, receptoren, and effectors, effectoren, encompasses the object. The properties of the objects that act on the receptors constitute the characteristic carrier for the subject. Wir sehen, wie das Subjekt hier mit seinen Rezeptoren und Effektoren das Objekt umfasst. Die Eigenschaften des Objekts, die auf die Rezeptoren einwirken, bilden die Merkmalträger für das Subjekt. The receptors, sensors, sensory organs, ways of access of the animal or human subject, and the effectors, ways of operative intervention of animal and human subjects manipulating or dealing with objects, things, plants, animals, humans. Receivers and effectors are abstractly dissociated on the side of the object, which can be a living being, animal, plant, human, or a thing. We distinguish between the qualities captured by the sensors and the qualities they offer for intervention, that is, the various points of application, the handles of things. Objects have qualities that act on the subject. So theoretical biology 106. Under their influence, the subject sets its effectors in activity. which in turn imprint their characteristics on certain properties of the object. Thus, these become the subject's effect bearers. Characteristic bearers and effect bearers are held together by the object's counterpart, which completes the functional circle. And of course, the subject intervenes on the object. On a strictly operational level, the characteristics of objects appear to the subject not only as sensible qualities, optical, acoustical, tactile, with fragrance and taste attends, but by eliciting action, attractive or repulsive appearance, emitting pleasant or unpleasant sound, being soft or hard, hot and cold, smelling and tasting good or bad. An object is a carrier of perceptual signs and points of possible intervention. An object can remain invisible to all possible subjects and be seen only by one subject. An object appears to a subject if and only if the subject has interest in it. The subject is capable of detecting perceptual notes on the object with a view to intervene on it. The qualities of the subject are thus sensory and operative, qualities that are in an intrinsic correlation with certain objects. An object does not exist in itself, but only according to the sensibility and operativity of a given subject. A subject exists only when exposed to objects that present themselves with certain perceptual and operative characteristics. So quotes, following quotes, TB 105 and 6, the effects that pass from the characteristic bearers to the receptors take place in the characteristic world, map value of the subject. The effects of the effectors on the effect carriers of the object play out in the effective world of the subject. The transfer of the effects from the receptors to the effectors takes place in the inner world of the subject. End of quote. So the inner world of the subject turns inside out the outer world. The outer world itself is not independent in meaning. There are as many outside worlds as there are possible subjects who can access it. Thus, the functional circuit has perceptible and operational features that are the qualities of objects. Beings can become different objects according to different living, plants, animals, humans, subjects they relate to. The different modes of beings, a living subject, open and detect perceptible features in objects while triggering possible modes of intervention. An animal can use a part of its body or body as a whole as an operative, functional way of intervention in its world. Each person takes the various objects of everyday life and adjusts their body to the objects in their world, sitting in chairs, lying on beds, going up and down stairs, entering and exiting spaces. Each object is deformalizable in the way it appears to each subject with its own perceptual and operational characteristics. Okay. So I move forward. Thank you. I move forward to the main argument. Point number 8. Characterization of the musical atmosphere. This is exactly what is at stake here in Van School's hypothesis and in Merleau-Ponty's interpretation. So what they call the psychoid effect. So the world is a psychoid, not a psyche inside my brain and soma outside my brain, but everything is structurally a psychoid. That causes an action, a set of actions, a constellation of actions done over the course of a day is musical. We feel that we are going through a good time or a bad time, that the day went well or went badly. To be out of tune or in tune with one's life, the feeling that everything is in tune happens on a plane identical to the production of music when we listen to a musical piece or play an instrument. what is heard from an audible acoustic content to an auditory sensation, and yet the way we feel is identical in every way. The question can be asked in another way, by reversing the state of affairs. Could it be rather that we hear a melody, a harmony, because our being has the capacity to be affected by the feeling that music provokes, and not only by the acoustic content? No doubt that without sound, there is no perception of sound. And without the ability to hear, there is no experience of sound. But isn't it true that to be carried away by the music, in a waking dream, for example, we need much more than the auditory sensation? What if we were intrinsically musical, affectable by melodies, harmonies, consonances, and dissonances? This step always allows for the interpretation of the Kantian a priori form from a musical point of view. The atmosphere of the human being is musical and therefore feels the tuning of what is happening when the human is active or is passively exposed to what is going on. The characteristic of an action is melodic, and its operational plan has to do with musical tuning. When everything goes well or when everything goes wrong, we feel that we experience moments akin to someone who is listening to music and is transported by the emotions, feelings, or thoughts that it provokes. Our attempt to intervene in order to change dissonance or into consonance, lack of harmony into harmony, rhythm without cadence into a rhythm without cadence, its groove is entirely musical. The instruments are different, but the meaning is the same. To take up a physical training activity, to engage in physical activity for the sake of wellness, to feel good, to be happy, routine leads to a musical pattern. Every task we perform, every action, every conversation we have, book we read, show we watch, has the same effect that we feel when listening to music. Music gives an idea of subjective space. When we are so strongly seized by it, we forget the origin of the sounds that come from this or that instrument and surrender to the rhythm. The subjective directional signs come awake in us, even without bodily moving along, and now seem to fill the space belonging to them together with sounds. There isn't always a tuning between what each of us is and what we have to do, or between us and what today brings, but the element common to all beings without exception, the atmosphere that constitutes the world environment of life, is time. One of the possible expressions of time is melody. Farouk School claims that we inhabit a psychoid atmosphere. There is no content that is not psychoid. Carl Jung says the same, mutatis mutandis. The atmosphere that the human inhabits is psychological. This does not mean that the stone is psycho. The stone is devoid of world and can never have a world. So Heidegger. I want to finish 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes. 5, 6 minutes. Okay. I've written a lot. Pages. So through Augustinus, life is a distentio animi, a distension of the spirit, of the minds. With John Sellers, we watched yesterday how difficult it is to translate those very ancient words. Between past time that is no more and future time that is not yet. It exists between the first instant and the last. The qualitative understanding of the beginning, of short, medium, and long terms, of outcomes or open situations, of the end of situations does not require clocks or stopwatches. but rather the existence of this object requires the presupposition of the understanding of time as a dimension of the distension that stretches towards disappearance or elongates towards overabundance. We are never mere observers, or at least not unscathed observers. We never come out unscathed from the analysis of time. And everything that happens is already with our eyes set on the finish line, on the end. We ask what time is it to know how much time is left, not to know the exact time at the moment of asking the question. There's when night falls, it happens not only at a certain time, but it also happens for me. Night also happens falling for me. In the same way, when the day breaks, it is not only daybreak, it daybreaks for me, day has broken for me. Everything that happens is interwoven point by point in the complex fabric that weaves a texture between me and what is not me, but everything is already inside this totality that always moves forward, even when the night fall and the night falling for me do not coincide. When the break of dawn and the moment in time when I wake up do not coincide. Regardless of whether we are looking at still life or a moving object, the tension in the expectation of a predator of the hunt is anything but a frozen, motionless. It is dramatic. No photograph of a fighter in Wittgenstein or a dancer is without this explosive, dynamic, or temporality that points outward from the protagonist's similarly characterized, crystallized body. The same thing happens to a stationary object as happens to an object traveling at high speed. But the tubular horizon, or the bubble, sub-bubble, is structural. It morphological modifies everything that falls under its purview. It is an invisible force field that does not act only on perception, but lasts for the time of life, distends itself throughout time. In every appointment on our calendar, which we mark so as not to forget it, the complex structure of the living, of the being that is alive, of the being that lives, that is present. Life is never static. In the human, the beingness of living is never reduced to the present because it is defined by absence. Absence is not unreality, unable to make happen. Each of us can be seen as the tubular horizon, impermeable to one another. In each moment of time, there are completely different contents because they are morphologically structured by each being in a singular way, as if each being had its own tone, its own accent, its own melody, its own sound, as if it had its own soundtrack, of which it was the author, without ever having played any instrument or even being good at singing. Because the vocalization we are talking about here is different from the popular version of music, as Socrates called it, the démodé musique. If not symphonic, it is purely polyphonic. Even without harmony or melody, it is a complex arrangement of different tones interrupted by complex silences and rhythms. But the tubular horizon is temporally constituted. It is not on a universal scale. It encompasses anything, everything that encompasses itself. There are as many universes as there are living beings. How is it possible to know that every other person's world is life? How is it the intersection of these tubular channels possible? A dynamic and living intersection that is continually making and remaking itself after it is undone. The living being is in fact already a platform, an interface, a node of relationships. No human being exists without others. Of course, nothing and no one exists outside this mutating lens that holds in it all the 10 billion faces of our generation and of all the generations of humans from the first to the last contracted into a compact complex that sometimes expands into a gaze that sees us in the blink of an eye, without which reality could still be itself, albeit unrecognizable to the human gaze, the only gaze that is. And yet, none of this is enough to account for what it is to be and to live, because even with all this complexification, we have not exhausted all the possibilities of thinking about what constitutes the world environment of the living being that is the human being, how it finds itself and is in life, how it understands or grasps the complex and lucid structure whose dynamics accord with the existential project of the beginning that comes from the end and therefore always seems to surprise and anticipates us. As António Machado says, the path is made by walking. There is no path. Caminante son tus velas, el camino y nada más. Thank you, and I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for your talk, Alan. That first question.
Do we have the mic? Yes, here. There.
First, thank you for a really interesting presentation and adding, I think, some different dimensions than what we've talked about so far. As a kind of dialogue point, I was thinking about, I'll ask the question first and then give some examples from the PWL tradition, but it's, you see philosophy as having a melodic task, duty, or even an amelodic one. And what I mean is I'm very interested in kind of philosophy and music as a spiritual exercise. And I think there are moments from the Western philosophical tradition that think about the task as a fundamental one of engaging with melody. Very quickly, moment one, Diogenes of Sinope, quoting Diogenes Laertius, said, my task, we were talking about this yesterday, my task is to sing a little bit of off key to make sure that everyone else is in key. That's part of the cynic performance, right? So his one is a kind of attunement task. You go to the extremities to provide contrast. I was also thinking about both Bergson and Wagner, who's thinking about Schopenhauer's limited read of Schopenhauer's World as Well as an Individual. That, there's this, that one of the tasks of philosophy is to get us to de-engage from our sort of spatialization of the world in order to, carry out our instrumental activities. Use like Wagner has a description in his Beethoven essay, it's like it gives us magic drops that kind of pull us away from our everyday modes of engagement to be attentive to that bubble structure. So there's like the attunement group, and then I was thinking of another group of people who think about creativity in music to get the kind of movement of the past, that sort of generalized presence that gives us an attention to the variation we have, right? So famously, I was thinking of in American Pragmatism, Cornel West has spent a lot of time thinking about the role of jazz as a way to think about our kind of free potentials and the play available in that space. And then especially your last bit made me think of course, of John Cage in 433, thinking about what you could do with the sort of form of the bubble, right? And what that interior space does. I only bring up the examples again to think about like, how do you think about philosophy's role given this sort of melodic tendencies of humans and then the kind of polyphonic level above? I think you.
Thank you for your thoughts. I'm a punk rocker. Philosophy for me is performance. I think when we read Plato's dialogue, it's a contradictory in act or effect one. So it's something that's already done. And only explaining it, performing in classrooms, maybe we get there. Or here, writing for this presentation was maybe a performance. Writing lots of pages and rearranging the pages is so it's one take. I think there's a jazzistic element in Greek philosophy. So the element is chaos. Man muss in tausend sich haben, einen Tanzstern gebären zu können. Nietzsche says. So this is one take. The second take is I'm interested in the phenomenology of Stimmung. So this is my main take. So the movement that comes from Max Schiller's phenomenology through Husserl's late thinking, and of course Martin Heidegger, and through this approach from theoretical biology from School gets as fallen forgetfulness because history has been told by Victory One, and the guy has connection between Nazis. It's what interests me. So that I'm a very bad musician. I make lots of noise. And I quit playing music more than 30 years ago. So I started to teach philosophy in 1990. But I think there is a parallel between teaching philosophy, or learning philosophy, and playing music. You cannot do both. Even Nietzsche couldn't do that. So, but the element is the same. The expression is schizophrenic, concurrent, I guess, but the element is the same. So I would say what interests me is the elements of being human is time, and its utmost expression is melody, rhythm, dissonance, consonance, plemeles, as the Greeks say, absurd, false key, false note, very interested in it, and silence, and it's different than deafness, but even deafness is, of course, a musical phenomenon. Everything is, I'm interested in this dynamic temporal extension of being.
Really interesting. We'll have to talk more. I also didn't mention Susan Langer, who I think is also interested, particularly in that tensional moment, but I'll leave for other questions.
We have a further question from back home. Please, yeah. The microphone, yeah.
Thank you, Antonio. One punk rocker to another. And I'm very familiar with trying to navigate between music and philosophy, and it's a healthy process. But it's just like following up from Ellie, and with a little question at the end. There was 3 texts I was thinking of as well when you were speaking, when you were performing this dream. I thought I was entering a dream for almost an hour, and I'll tell you why at the end. But I guess one is is George Steiner's Poetry of Thought. This idea, and of course, you've been reading Heidegger for a long time, but this idea of turning thought into a kind of, when I say poetry, I'm also talking about music. And the second text, when your list of course, I was thinking of Stimmung the whole way through, and of course, I'm going to mention that name, Kierkegaard, because for me, a lot of his thinking is based on Stimmung. I think before Heidegger, famously in Fear and Trembling, he exhorted the opening, the introduction is called Stemming, and it's the same word, the Stimmung, and he it's literally 4 ways of trying to understand the story of Abraham. He gives 4 different stories, neither of them have a conclusion. All 4 of them don't really have a conclusion. He's trying to understand, and of course, it's attunement. And as you know, with Kierkegaard, there's another beautiful passage in a very strange, ironic book called Prefaces, which is literally 7 prefaces to books that were never written. And the last 7 prefaces, he asks the question, what is a preface? A preface is Stimmung. And then it goes on for about 2 pages, what a Stimmung might be. Stimmung is this, Stimmung is that. And he's literally tuning in. The last of the 3 examples, there's another, if anyone ever had strength and endurance to read Stages in Life's Way, which is a long, very arduous, very painful text by Kierkegaard, but it's his most obscure and most poetic text. At the end of the book, he says, is anyone still listening to me? And he says, probably not. If you got this far, here I am speaking writing in the Danish language, which no one really understands, and part of the few silly people and Danish Hegelians, and that's it. But I'm going to tell you why I like the Danish language. And then he goes off, which I think is probably the most remarkable 3 pages in Danish language. Just about the language twisting on itself. It's literally an example of achievement. So I think this would be helpful for you looking into it. And the third text is, you're probably aware of it, is Rilke's poem, which says, Gesang ist Dasein. And I remember in German, followed by the words, easy for the god. So literally, song is existence. It's in Sonnets to Orpheus, number 3. And you could have easily given the title of your paper, Gesang ist Dasein, as well as being Stimmung. So my small little question at the end is, could we interpret this? It's work about hermeneutics you're doing and attunement the whole way through, and the tuning of the guitar, the voice, all these things in the word Stimme or Stimmung. I heard you talking what it's like entering the mind of a translator of poetry, someone that's a translator, and really trying to translate, for example, Rilke or Greek poets or philosophers, which I know you have experienced, and you have translated Trakel, which is a great poet of Stimmung, of images. So, did we just hear what it's like to be and a dream of the role or the inner workings of a translator of a very sensitive poetry?
5 minutes and a last question, please.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Barry. First, the first remark. One of the books of my life is Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann, and he writes on Kierkegaard's analysis on the devil, that only music can express the devil's feelings and represent the devil. And that musical representation is actually a very Kantian. So one cannot understand Vorstellung if you don't understand it temporarily and musically. If you understand it spatially, like in Bach's song, one doesn't understand what's going on there. So that's the first step. Thank you for remembering that. The second take is, it is very difficult for a Portuguese to translate it, to understand Stimmung. I would translate like vocalization, because the word Stimme, walking is in Latin. So it's very difficult to translate. So yesterday I listened to John, and never came up the word timos and timoides, epithumia. And it's very important to understand that the psyche is very important, but timos, euthymia, dysthymia, athymia is very important to understand what's going on. And in this changing of the heart, like entulema. So that in English you say move, it's fantastic, it's very, the Germans say gemüt, mutig sein. And it's maybe animus, in Portuguese, ter animo, but it's completely different. So I need really to take off and to have a musical, getting into a jam session when I'm translating, so jam session in my mind. Otherwise, if I translate with Estado de Espírito, Estado de Alma, just Estado, it's too static for me. Nothing is going on. I hated it. I translate with cadência, vibration, vibração. So it's very difficult. So trago. You need to invent a Portuguese language to translate trago, because even trago is German. It's like Heidegger. It is German, but not lots of people can understand Heidegger's German. Lots of friends of mine in Freiburg, they don't understand Heidegger. So it's a musical workout, I guess, maybe musical workout. I don't have much to say to you.
Just last second, the vocalization is interesting because in his diaries, Kierkegaard uses the word Latin vocalization in their point. So you tapped into it.
Okay.
He was also, how can I find other words? And one of them was vocalizations. That's deep inside his diaries.
Thank you very much. Help me to thank Antonio for